Kenya. She holds a Master's of International Affairs from Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, which awarded her a Distinguished Alumni Award in 2018, an award that was granted to her as the first Black person and to receive such an honor from Tufts University. Upon her retirement from the bench, she successfully moved her legal profession to alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, particularly focusing on mediation and arbitration. She is a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators in London and the Kenya branch. She was recently appointed a member of the International Advisory Board of the Office of the Ombudsman for the United Nations Funds Program and chairs the Advisory Board of Africa-Asia Mediation Association. Welcome, Lady Justice. Our second panelist is Dr. Tarisai Mutangi. Tarisai Mutangi is the head of department at the legal postgraduate programs at the University of Zimbabwe. He is a practicing attorney under the firm of DM Attorneys, which is based in Harare. His research interests include international human rights law with particular focus on African human rights systems, focusing on an implementation of international human rights standards. He provides capacity development services to national human rights institutions in the areas of women's rights based on the national law, Maputo Protocol, and the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which is the CEDAW instrument. Our third panelist today is Dr. Japheth Biegon, who is a legal and policy expert on normative and institutional architecture of African human rights systems. He has over 15 years professional experience practically engaging in writing and teaching on the African systems. He is the adjunct lecturer at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria, where he teaches the master's program in human rights and democratization in Africa. Dr. Biegon holds an LLD in international human rights from the University of Pretoria. Welcome, Dr. Mutangi. Welcome, Dr. Biegon. Allow me to ask my co-moderator, Santana, to introduce our two panelists, Dr. Stephanie Rotenbach and Itzo. Welcome.
Dr. Stephanie Rothenberger is the current director at the Conrad Adenauer Stiftung Rule of Law Program for Sub-Saharan Africa, Anglophone countries. She studied law at the University of Munich, Lausanne, and Heidelberg, and absorbed her training to attain the qualification to work as a judge at the High Court of Hamburg. She holds a PhD in international environmental law at the Max Planck Institute for Comparative Public Law and international law in Heidelberg, as well as at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Before her appointment at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, she was serving as a ministerial counselor for the German parliament in Berlin. She has also worked with the German Federal Council, the representation of the German states at the federal level as a consultant for international parliamentary affairs in Berlin. Welcome, Dr. Stephanie. Our fifth panelist is Anne Ireri. She is the Executive Director of FIDA Kenya since September 2019. She is a lawyer and an advocate of the High Court of Kenya with 15 years post-admission experience. She is a women's rights transformative champion with a solid and proven record in law, policy, and advocacy matters within the public and non-governmental sector. Anne has recently been elected as the chairperson of the Election Observer Group ELOG, the premier domestic observers group in the region. She is a recipient of the prestigious United States Global Women Leaders International Program. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Santana. And last but certainly not least is Itzo. Itzo is the author of the publication we discussed today. And allow me to invite Stephanie Rotenbach of the Conrad Adenauer Foundation to tell us more about why we are hosting this roundtable, as well as to tell us a bit more about the author. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Elsie. Thank you, Santana. I'm very pleased to be here. And first of all, allow me to extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished panelists and to all our guests today in this memorable month of March in which we celebrate International Women's Day. And that means that we are not only celebrating the achievements of courageous women in overcoming the obstacles to gender equality, but it also means that we have to remind ourselves of the many shortcomings that are still existent in the field of women's rights, and that we still have a very long way ahead of us to reach proper gender equality. And I think personally, and I think this opinion might be shared by many, that it is utterly deplorable and unacceptable that we are now in the 21st century, women who constitute about half of the human population are still discriminated against only due to the mere fact of their gender. However, this is not a problem that is limited to the sub-Saharan region, but it is a worldwide phenomenon. I think it's important to stress this. And me, as a German woman, I can also tell you that also in Germany, we are not there yet. We have not reached full gender equality. So also there we have a long way ahead of us. And I think in this regard, we can all learn from each other. However, Konrad Adenauer Foundation's Rule of Law program for Sub-Saharan Africa has always put a very strong focus on the promotion of women's rights. And with me being the new director of the program since October last year, this path will of course be continued, and we will stay very active and engaged in this field, especially, and I also have to stress this, as I'm the first female director in the history of this program, which was founded in 2006. So as a program, we sat together in the last year and we were thinking about how can we be most effective, how can we be impactful to contribute to positive change in the field of women's and girls' rights. And we have come to the conclusion as a program that if we want to reach change for the better, we have to equip citizens, you know, with basic tools, and these basic tools are actually knowledge about their rights and awareness of their rights. So for us, we decided it is important to get citizens on board and to have them know, yes, about their rights, because how can you stand up for your rights? How can you request enforcement of your rights if you are not aware of them? And Kenya has a very good constitution, a very progressive one, especially when it comes to human rights and also to women's rights. But of course, citizens have to be aware of what is written in the constitution. And the outcome of our deliberations in the program is a book. And the book is called, you see in the background, the cover of the book in poster form. The title is very simple. It's called Women and Girls Know Your Rights. And the book contains a very concise compilation of the most important articles of the Kenyan Constitution and the most important parts of Kenyan legislation and policy framework with regards to women's and girls' rights. And for us, it was very important to have this publication, to have it well structured, focusing on the main areas where women are most likely to face discrimination, but also to keep it as comprehensible as possible so that we can reach out to as many people as possible, not only to women, but also to men. We will share the link to this publication shortly after Itza has given us more insights in her work on the publication in the chat. And I would ask you, please share it as widely as possible, because this project can only live and fly if it's brought out to as many people as possible. And if this is a success, we will reach out to the region and we will try to do similar publications in other countries of the region, because we are a regional program. And that's why I'm also happy that we have regional experts here today as well. However, I would like to thank at this point the many people who have helped us bring this publication to life. So first of all, our producer, Ravi Kamalka, who's actually a renowned filmmaker who worked on this project with us. And also Fida, whose executive director is with us today and who gave very important input to this publication. And Anne Ireri, she also provided the foreword for our book. I would also like to thank Charles Njuguna, who is our fantastic designer, because for us it was really important to have a very appealing design to bring this publication out to the people. And last but not least, Itza Luhumyu, who is our very talented young author of this publication. She is not only a writer, but she is also an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. And she did an excellent work in structuring the book and compiling all the important information. And I'm very happy she's with us today. She's at the moment on a scholarship with the School of African and Oriental Studies in London, where she studies comparative literature. But I'm happy she could join us nevertheless. And Itza, I would now pass on to you and ask you to please give our audience an insight in your research process, why this publication is important for you and what your expectations are from it, especially from the perspective of a young Kenyan woman. Thank you very much, and I look forward to lively deliberations in our roundtable. I pass on to Itza.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for that introduction. I'm happy to be here. So when I started the research and when I started thinking about the best way in which I could present the regulatory and legal framework with respect to the rights of girls and women, the most important question I had is how best would we present this booklet in a way that was accessible to as many people as possible, away from the legal jargon of people who are working in the legal profession, but at the same time be able to kind of capture the daily realities of girls and women in Kenya. So I'll just proceed to share my screen so that you can get a kind of like a snippet of the book. Just a moment. I think you can see it now. So as Dr. Stephanie so rightly said, we are referring to this as Women and Girls Know Your Rights. We thought this would be like the best way to just capture people's attention and encapsulate who we are, like trying to reach with this booklet. So when we started thinking about how best to kind of put this to, like people who would like access this book, we thought about the public and private dichotomy, so that we wanted to create a text that would speak to the experiences that women and girls have in the private, landscape. And then when they step out of that kind of private realm and landscape, how else do they kind of navigate life in the, public realm? So we thought it would be, sorry, just a minute. We thought it would be well to look at the legal and regulatory framework with respect to women and families. So we looked at the laws and the policies that are kind of existing right now, at least in Kenyan law. And then we looked at women, technology. So we looked at, women and single parents, we looked at women and families, and we also looked at women and sexual and reproductive health. So for us, we felt like these three sections particularly kind of spoke to the private, or the private realm with respect to women and girls' experiences. And then we also looked at women in politics, we looked at women and education, and we looked at women in the workplace. And what I thought most interesting, we looked also at women in the media. So under women in the media, we looked at not only the participation of women in print media, broadcast, and technology, and digital technologies, but we also looked at how they're represented in this technology. We thought this was very important. So this is, in as much as we try to kind of compress a lot of information in a very small book, we still have kind of a lot. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to be able to go through everything, but I think this booklet will be shared and you can kind of see what's inside. So what we have, for example, I'll just show you the first section. So this is women in politics, and we give some, some notes, examples, and figures of the situation right now in the country, and then we give the legal and policy landscape. Of course, we're looking at like international provisions, and then of course we're looking at the Constitution of Kenya, and some of the relevant, at least the most relevant statutes and policies, and then we're looking at some of the women who are kind of participants or who have spoken to this question. For example, in women in politics, we're looking at some voices here: Martha Karua, Samantha Maina, Bina Marcelo. We thought it would be important to have people who have experience in these things, like actual lived experiences, to kind of speak to this and give experiences with respect to what is already existing, but also what else can be done. Yeah, so this is just kind of, I'm just going to like flip through the book so that you get a sense of what's there. Again, I'm not going to go through all of it because it's 98 pages. It's very slim, but also will take up much of the time. So I'll just wrap up by saying that for me, I think working on this project was very illuminating because I have, I have training in law, and I kind of had a sense of what the policy and legal landscape with respect to the rights of girls and women was. But I think it was not until I conducted research that I realized that we kind of have like a good foundation for, the enforcement of girls, the rights of girls and women. We have good policies. We have fantastic statutes. I think for me, as I see it, from where I'm standing, and through the research process, the problem I think is in enforcement. So for me, I think this booklet is really important. It comes at a really good time. One, because it's accessible. At least it's not full of legal jargon, so many people can just kind of read through it. And number two, it's a starting point. It provides a place to which people, particularly girls and women, but also men, can go to when they're trying to figure out what the policy and legal landscape with respect to the rights of girls and women is. I don't know whether Dr. Stephanie has anything else to say.
Oh, well, thank you, Itza, for this overview. But I think that was very insightful, and I think we can then start our roundtable discussion. But I also I forgot to thank ICJ actually for their initiative, because actually I shared the book with them, and they liked the book very much, and it was their idea to have this event together. And Elsie, I thank you very much for this idea, because this is actually the first time today that we present the book officially to the public, and I'm very happy about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie, and thank you, Idzo, for setting the context for this discussion today. I'd like to remind the participants that you can engage with us through the chat section. You can send in your questions and comments. For those who'd like to voice their opinions or questions, you may raise your hands. You'll see a hand icon in the Zoom application. I'd now like to invite Elsie to kick off the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Santana, and thank you very much, Itzo, for that wonderful outline. and giving us an insight and sense of what the publication is about. We really appreciate your energy and hearing a young feminist talk about women and girls know your rights in Kenya. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. So allow me to invite Lady Justice, Justice Alwatch, to kick off the conversation with a set of questions for you, Judge. In the book that Itzo has just presented, she has talked about facets of women's lives. There's the private part and the public life of women. And your life is a testament of having served in the public for very many years. And in one of the chapters, it addresses the issue of women in the workplace. Allow me, Judge, to pose this question to you. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey and experience of being not only a pioneer female judge in Kenya, but also internationally? And secondly, what are the particular difficulties and challenges from your perspective that you see women face in positions of leadership? And also, how far has the situation improved based on the presentation that Itzo has provided and the content of the book, as well as your own personal experience? Welcome, Judge.
Good morning, and thank you, ICJ Kenya and Conrad, for inviting me to this discussion, this roundtable discussion. I think your first question was my journey. Am I right? Was that your first question?
Yes, Judge, it was the first question. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
I've had a very long journey in the legal career. The journey started way back in 1974. That's when I joined the Kenya Judiciary at the lowest level possible. It was then known as District Magistrate Professional, DM2 Professional. That was after my law degree and my admission as an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. But I have been often asked after admission as an advocate, why did you opt for a DM2 position that was really the lowest? And normally I have, and quite frankly, at that, I was at a young age. I was already a wife and a mother, and I wanted something that was stable in my life. I wanted to stabilize my life. So I didn't really think of going out into the field to practice. I didn't really have role models, practicing lawyers who are my role models. I didn't have. But quite often I used to read in the newspapers decisions made by a woman magistrate. There was only one other woman magistrate at that time, Justice Effie Owuor. She was then a magistrate. So when there were applications for magistrates, I applied. I went for interview, rather challenging interview. But what I did, and I would hope that women, as many of us can, if there is a role model that you have, and if you're going for something that is completely new, I ended up going to the office of the only woman magistrate who was there just to have a conversation before I went for the interview. I hadn't met her before, and I met her on that day of the interview. So I was eventually, after we waited, I was with about four men. We waited for about 2 weeks. We were all given the job. That was the time when most magistrates were from Commonwealth countries, mostly Great Britain, India, Pakistan, and Kenyans were in the minority at that time, both on the bench, magisterial bench, and the High Court and Court of Appeal. So I was given the job. Started off my career in the children's court. There was only one children's court in the country, and it was in Nairobi. I suppose it was. I started the job at a young age, and maybe they looked at me and said, maybe that's where she should start. Fortunately, I worked my way. I got my promotions: resident magistrate, senior resident magistrate, quite rapidly, and eventually I was elevated as a judge of the High Court. I spent a considerable time in the High Court. I always attribute this to my gender, because I didn't see, there was a time, the two of us were in the High Court alone as two women judges for almost 10 years. And I think I rightly attribute that to our gender. I didn't see anything else because we did the same amount of work, but anyway. So it was whilst I was in the High Court that I decided that instead of, I don't want to complain that I'm not going to the Court of Appeal, there's so much else I can do. And that's when, working as a judge in the High Court of Kenya, I served in the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child for 6 years, still serving as a judge. I established the African Union Committee. It was OAU, and the year after it transformed into AU. I established that committee and chaired it for 4 years, African Union Committee on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. I also, I was quite active when I was in the High Court bench. I also established, with a committee, of course, I established the Family Division of the High Court of Kenya. I'm very happy and proud that that division is still up and running and doing good work. I established that committee there were various reasons that made me approach the Chief Justice and tell him we have to have a family division. There was the criminal division, there was the civil division, and I think business community had made enough noise, and there was now the commercial division, but there was no family division. And there was every reason, as far as I'm concerned, why there should have been a family division. It was an uphill task because the CJ of the day, I will not mention his name, he asked me why I thought I wanted to be an activist, and yet I was on the bench. Despite all that, I pulled FIDA Kenya along with me. They worked with me. I had a committee, but FIDA was involved also because I invited them and I explained to them why there was a need for a family division. And of course, they supported the initiative. So eventually then I was elevated to the Court of Appeal as the second woman in the Court of Appeal, a second woman judge. I didn't serve for very long in the Court of Appeal. I think it could have been 2 years. And then I was identified and nominated by the Kenya government to run for elections to the International Criminal Court at The Hague. And I was elected, and I started my term at The Hague in, it was May of 2009. I was a few months late because I had to finish my part-hards or whatever I was doing in the Court of Appeal. And I served in The Hague for 9 years. It is one term of 9 years. The last 3 years in my tenure at The Hague as a judge, I was in the presidency, the first vice president. It was an all-female presidency, unprecedented in international setting. The president was Sylvia Fernandez. She was from yes, I'll tell you in a minute. I don't think she'll be happy if I can't remember her country. I was the first vice president. I was from Kenya. And Judge Kuniko from Japan was the second vice president. And in the presidency, we were responsible for the proper administration of the court of the ICC. We assigned judges work. We assigned them to various divisions. We handled some appeals from the registry, and so on and so forth. And we were responsible for explaining the working of the ICC internationally. We went on missions. Sometimes we sent other judges to explain just how does the ICC work. We were not defending the ICC, we were explaining so that people could understand, because there was a misconception about how the ICC works. And I also remember I particularly was on a campaign to get more women practicing lawyers to join the team of lawyers that work at the ICC. I think that Janet, I did have a meeting here in Nairobi. I had a meeting in Rwanda and one other African country, so that we could have women practicing lawyers to enroll so that they could be picked either to defend accused persons or victims. I think that very briefly, that's what I can say. Later on, if you ask me any other questions, I can answer questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Judge, for a wonderful exposition, albeit brief, of your journey to the very high levels of serving, including at an all-female presidency at the ICC. You've alluded to several milestones in your professional journey. And a follow-up question to that, which you have identified a few of the challenges that you saw as you were rising up through the ranks, was the fact that some of the positions that were given to you were because you perceived that it was only because you were a woman. In your perspective, has the situation changed looking back and where you are now? Has the situation changed in addition to your own proactivity in trying to get?
Oh, is it mine or yours? Is it mine or yours? Wow, wow. God help me. Wow. I don't know whether it's mine or yours. I don't know. I hope I'm not switched off. Can you hear me?
Judge, we can hear you. I think it's hers.
Ah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For a change, it's not mine. Normally. Yeah, it happens, isn't it? It does happen. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it happens. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about Judge. Our apologies. We seem to have lost connectivity. My sincere apologies about that. Welcome back, Judge. I had posed a follow-up questions. Our participants, we apologize for that slight hitch. To you, Judge.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Judge.
Okay. You want to repeat the question because we have had 2 interruptions. Do you mind?
Okay. Yes, yes, I'll repeat the question, Judge. We wanted a follow-up question was to concerning some of the challenges that you have mentioned and painting towards your journey towards achieving the highest career success. We wanted to see from the challenges that you have highlighted, has the situation from your perspective changed or has it improved that would enable more women to join these positions of influence, positions of legal advocacy at either national or regional level? Welcome, Judge.
Thank you very much. Certainly that is the situation at the Kenyan bench has changed. I mean, right now, we have a woman who is acting in the position of Chief Justice. We would never, my sister Judge and I, we would never ever have imagined that things like this would happen. And we welcome wholeheartedly the fact that there are many more women in the High Court bench. In fact, some women that I left when I went to The Hague, they are both in the High Court and Court of Appeal. I don't have the statistics. I cannot tell you how many women are today in the Kenyan High Court and how many are in the Court of Appeal. The only statistics I can say is that there are 2 women in the Supreme Court. I just hope that there will be, there'll be more, or at least half, or 3-4, 3 against 4 men. But the situation certainly has changed, and there are many women magistrates. But back in the day, we did everything possible to make sure that more women were brought to the bench, were hired on the bench. The two of us did as much as we could. We even went to the authorities and we asked, are we not performing? Is that why there are no more women being hired to the bench? But today the situation has changed. Strangely enough, internationally at the ICC, the court I served in for 9 years, there are more men now being elected than women. When I joined the ICC in 2009, there were more women judges. And at that time, there were 4 African women judges, apart from the others from Europe and South and the Pacific, South and Pacific. But today, the latest, there were elections, but there are more men than women. And I hope, election is election. But I was just surprised that we are going back to having more men at the ICC than women judges. But maybe the situation will change. But Kenya, I think Kenya, we are doing fairly well. I wouldn't say very well, but fairly well. That's the word I can use. The women are coming up. The women are doing a good job. They are making precedent-setting decisions on the bench, and I'm very proud of them. I've told them so, actually, yeah. And I've even told the acting CJ that even if she's there for a few months only, Justice Mwilo, but she, we are proud that she is there, because we never imagined that a woman would act as a Chief Justice in the Kenyan judiciary. And I have told her so that it doesn't matter how long or how short she is there, but the record will always show that a woman acted as a Chief Justice in the judiciary of Kenya, yeah.
Thank you, Judge. We appreciate that. Thank you very much. We're glad to know that indeed the situation has certainly improved. Allow me to invite Santana to pose this question to our second panelist, Dr. Tarisai Mutangi.
Thank you, Elsie. We'll now shift our focus from Kenya to Zimbabwe, and we'll hear from Dr. Tarisai. Please highlight for us a few legislations that promote women's rights in Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Santana. I hope you can hear me clearly. Yes, thank you for making me part of this important conversation. I know from the panelists, myself and Dr. Bigon, my colleague, we are in the minority in terms of gender, but I think that's appropriate for the day because we are celebrating the International Day for Women in the month of March. So it's also my honor to speak after Honorable Late Justice has spoken. Judges usually ask the questions, not answering the questions. So I'm happy that today she was answering those questions. So for Zimbabwe, let me start by saying that the adoption of a constitution in 2013 really changed the legislative framework in the country, not only for women's rights, but also, human rights in general, including children's rights and other new constitutional arrangements that came with that particular constitution. You may be amazed to know that previously our constitution condoned discrimination, gender discrimination based on custom. It clearly and expressly condoned that inequality as long as it was based on custom. So the adoption of the 2013 Constitution, we refer to the 2013 Constitution, was really a momentous occasion in that now we have an equality clause in the Constitution, which is Section 56. We call them sections in this part of the world, which talks about equality and non-discrimination. and it lists sex and gender as listed grounds. So when we say listed grounds, it means that if there's a complaint, of unfair discrimination based on sex and gender, once it's part of those listed grounds and it's unfair, it is a violation of that section 56. So it's our key provision in that regard. But you also have other new, provisions introduced by the Constitution. For instance, gender equality is now a founding value in terms of Section 3 of the Constitution, and also a national objective in terms of Section 17 of the same Constitution, where it says that there should be equal gender representation, not just representation, but equal gender representation in all institutions and agents of government. And that women should constitute at least half of the membership of all constitutional commissions and other elective and appointed government bodies established under the law. So it's a requirement that it has to be 50% and also equal representation in these institutions. Even the appointment of ministers and deputy ministers, the president is required to take into consideration the regional and gender balance in terms of ministerial appointment. But of course, when you look at what transpires on the ground, it becomes a different story. Probably I'll come back to that later on. Section 124 talks about the quota for women. That's in terms of political participation, in terms of parliamentary seats. And this issue of the quota system has also, aroused a bit of discussion as to whether it's appropriate or it's inappropriate in the circumstance. Is it appropriate in terms of promotion of gender equality in those key institutions? Judicial appointments should also reflect the gender composition of the country. Now, the language changes a bit. It talks about gender composition of the country. That's in terms of section 184. But of course, if you look at the judiciary, it's getting there bit by bit in terms of numbers, of course. But there's about attitudes and perspectives of gender, that's a different question altogether. The Constitution also established the Gender Commission, which is a constitutional commission responsible for the promotion and protection of women's rights, as well as adoption of programs that can change or that seek to change attitude towards gender equality, trying to deal with patriarchy, which is consolidated in our culture. So if you look at the constitutional framework, it really makes a solid foundation for the protection or at least the recognition of women's rights, as well as emphasis on gender equality. But there are also other pieces of legislation. Why? Because as we may be aware, a constitution does not implement itself. It needs laws, it needs policies, so that those constitutional principles can be implemented now on the ground. So these pieces of legislation become instruments of implementation of the Constitution. So you have got some key legislations such as the Domestic Violence Act, adopted specifically to deal with domestic violence. And you may be glad to know that in Section 3 of that Act, it also deals with issues to do with harmful cultural and traditional practices. So it lists them and adopt certain measures that the state or government should adopt to deal with domestic violence. Of course, the criminal code, like in any country, probably provides for provisions that could be regarded as enforcing women's rights indirectly, through criminalization of conduct that is deemed a violation of the rights of women. I can conclude by telling you that there is an ongoing debate right now of whether or not we should adopt a gender equality law that probably comprehensively identify these constitutional principles on gender equality and women's rights, and attempts to structure them, expand them, and create a framework for their implementation. So you see that if you look at concluding observations or recommendations, at least coming from treaty bodies, they are focusing mainly on implementation. To say there's an implementation gap. The legislative framework is there, the law is there. In any case, much of this law is designed from the template of international instruments. So in terms of law, the law is there. But when it comes to implementation of that law, there is a gap that needs to be closed up. So finally, I can also let the audience know that there are a number of pieces of legislation that impact on women's rights in Zimbabwe that still need to be revised so that they can come to conformity with the Constitution. For instance, the Citizenship Act, which in its current state does not allow or does not recognize women in terms of citizenship or transmission of citizenship to their spouses or to their children. In some cases, also losing citizenship as a result of divorce and such other scenarios. So there are some of the pieces of legislation that needs to be looked at, reviewed, and brought to the standard of the Constitution, which, in my view, also speaks to the framework of international human rights instruments that specifically deal with the rights of women in Zimbabwe and, of course, in the region and in the world.
Thank you, Dr. Tarisai. It's good to know that Zimbabwe moved from a constitution that condoned discrimination to having a progressive constitution that has a provision on equality and so many provisions on affirmative action, such as half of the members of constitutional commissions shouldn't be of one gender. And you also have institutions such as the Gender Commission. That leads me to my second question. Are women and girls in Zimbabwe aware of their rights? And if not, how can the situation be improved?
Thank you, Santana, for the question. That's a difficult question to answer easily. Why do I say so? Because look, I'm a researcher. I believe in findings where research is conducted using appropriate methodology to assess this. To say to what extent can we say women in Zimbabwe and girls in Zimbabwe are aware of their rights and how their situation can be improved. I've looked at, again, for reference, concluded observations, especially from the African Committee of Experts on the rights of girls in Zimbabwe. Of course, emphasizing on the issue of participation, to say government and its partners should adopt more programs that will result in girls and or children in general be aware of their rights. And the government always puts across the issue of Children's Parliament as one of those platforms on which girls and boys are able to engage on these kind of rights or on their rights and get an opportunity to be aware of them. But I do not think that it is sufficient in terms of its coverage. There's a lot of efforts being done by government, by CSOs and other development partners in terms of raising awareness of the rights of women and girls. But I really doubt that these efforts are reaching marginalized communities, remote communities, like in the rural areas and so forth and so on. I'm aware of organizations that also operate in those areas, but I am not convinced that the programs are comprehensive enough in terms of their outreach. So in that case, it's an issue of those with access to these programs that are being conducted by government and its partners. Those are the ones we can refer to as women and children or girls who are able to, at some extent, articulate their rights, are aware of the rights to some extent. I listen to the radio, quite often. television and other media platforms. I do not see that constant engagement, that constant publication of programs or initiatives that are meant to ensure that listeners, wherever they could be, are constantly brought in touch in terms of information that brings them in contact with their rights, so that they're able to articulate them, not only articulate them, but also they're able to seek remedies for their violations. Probably the review of the curriculum, which has actually happened in this country 5 years or so ago, could have been a good opportunity for government to probably infuse into the curriculum, even of primary school, to ensure that at that young age, girls and boys are able to engage with knowledge or information that is to do with their rights. I don't know why that is left for tertiary education or higher education, where we talk about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. For me, it's quite late in someone's life to be able to be taught those things. I thought it's important that if curriculum could be reviewed, let's infuse a bit of these rights at primary level. Let our kids be able to articulate a bit of these rights as they grow up. When they get into secondary school, the curriculum is more comprehensive. And when they get to tertiary education, they can articulate their rights. They know institutions are available out there for the protection of their rights, including courts and other non-judicial institutions available. You know, during lockdown here, we were participating in homeschooling, and I have no evidence whatsoever that when I engaged with my kids' curriculum at school, it gave them any chance of knowing their rights at all. I did not see any evidence of that. But I think it's an opportunity where we can do that. And just as we put religious texts, the stories in the Bible or in the Quran, and so being taught in primary school, why can we not have this kind of infusion of rights at that early age? I think it will go a long way in terms of getting our kids to grow up in an environment that is that have access to information on their rights. Back to you, Santana.
Thank you, Dr. Tarisai. The situation in Zimbabwe seems quite similar as Kenya. We have very progressive laws, but on the ground, women are still not aware of their rights. But you've given a very good suggestion there that it should be included in our syllabus in schools. So as children begin school, at least they know about their rights from a very young age. We'll now cast the focus back to Kenya, and we'll hear Dr. Annie Riri. Sorry, Annie Riri. Mm.
Go on.
Anne, you have extensive experience of working with women and girls. And we have these very progressive laws in Kenya. From your experience, are women on the ground able to articulate their rights?
Thank you very much, Santana. Thank you, Elsie, my counterpart, and thank you to ICJ for organizing this very important webinar. I also want to, by extension, thank the Conrad Foundation, and FIDA is extremely proud to be associated with this particular publication. And to also thank one of our pioneer mediators, retired Judge Joyce Alwoch, who's is really trailblazing in terms of FIDA mediations. It's always a pleasure to see you here alongside the other panelists. So thank you, Santana. I'll go straight to what you have asked of me. And similar to what Dr. Tarisai has just mentioned, I think one of the things, and allow me to just project this, which is a Constitution of Kenya 2010, it has really done is to expand the space of women and girls and citizens across the board to articulate their concerns. And just last year, we did celebrate the decade of the Constitution in Kenya. However, the question is, are really these rights changing lives for Kenyans? Is a Constitution transforming livelihoods and daily operations that Kenyans have to undertake for it to move from being a document on paper to being a reality that Kenyans can rely upon? And for us as FIDA, what we see is a bittersweet sweet in the sense that, yes, through awareness, through activism, through continuous education, not only have girls and women been educated on this constitution to some extent, but also men. I think there is appreciation, especially because of the litigation that has taken place. I think one of the things we herald and celebrate the most about the Constitution of Kenya 2010 is a chance it has given citizens in terms of jurisprudence development and the reality that you can really approach the court as any concerned Kenyan to test each and every aspect of the Bill of Rights in this Constitution. So there is some level of awareness that has taken place. However, the bitter is with regard to the fact that we are actually still seeing a lot of violations that women are facing. And for us, the concern is beyond the legislation, beyond the policies. In action, we are seeing more and more gruesome forms of violence against women. Allow me to single out the issue of femicide, which remains a key concern. It is actually a national disaster in our country. And even during COVID, FIDA, for instance, did roll out a toll-free number on the 15th of April 2020 to allow reporting of cases within the confines of the pandemic protocols and regulations. And I can confirm to the audience that as per 15th of February, at the end of February, sorry, this year, we have actually received more than 1,070 cases. These are cases that are actively reported to us that we are taking up and predominantly have to do with gender-based violence. Why do I point this out? That yes, in paper, in awareness, Kenyans know that certain actions are wrong. They know that women and girls need equality as well as men and boys. However, what we are seeing in terms of cases being reported is an escalation in terms of gender-based violence that women and girls are facing, and that points to more work that needs to be done, especially in terms of full implementation of the law. If you look at provisions or what is required within the criminal justice system to have even one successful case of murder or sexual offenses being prosecuted, beyond the law being clear and the provisions that outlaw a lot of these crimes, is a need to resource effectively the criminal justice system. So we are talking about shelters being established in the country, for example, that women and girls and men alike who need safety away from the confines of their home can find redress. We are looking at law enforcement being well resourced. We are looking at high-level investigation that is required, and eventually the courts also being resourced. We have seen within COVID the move, for example, towards technology. That is a plus. That's a huge milestone. However, a lot still needs to be done in terms of protection of witnesses, protection of victims, so that within the criminal justice sector, when you have a case being presented, you are certain of a positive outcome because the victim is well protected, well supported by the system through psychosocial support. But even when testifying in court, victim protection and witness protection is guaranteed. That way, the ODPP or the National Police Service have an easier chance of prosecuting the cases, and then the judiciary is able to articulate and pronounce itself successively and progressively on each of these individual cases. So yes, bittersweet, a lot still needs to be done, but we do celebrate that not all is lost. But then we do pick up on the glaring areas that have been exposed through the implementation that need to be taken to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. You have some very good recommendations, such as the building of shelters for sexual and gender-based violence victims, and law enforcement that is better resourced, and a stronger witness protection. You have highlighted a few of them, but perhaps you can highlight in more detail the barriers that women face in articulating their rights.
Thank you, Santana. So allow me to just speak from what I have highlighted. So for us, we see and a number of barriers that women still have to work through, as much as we have the Constitution of Kenya 2010. So I've highlighted a few in terms of access to justice, and beyond the systemic or institutional barriers such as resourcing the criminal justice system, we also have to look at elements such as cost and accessibility of justice. There are areas in Kenya away from the urban centers where police stations are spaced within realms of 100 or 120 kilometers apart. So then justice becomes a tertiary issue, not just secondary, to any citizen who needs, one, to access a police station to report a case, and secondly, to be able to access a court. We do appreciate the judiciary has done well in terms of increasing the physical presence of courts, but there's still much more that needs to be done in terms of coupling not only the courts, but with law enforcement and also with the health center, so that in terms of gender-based violence, a victim does not have to unnecessarily travel extreme distances to access a dispensary, to access a police station, or to access a court. So those are some of the things we need to look at, because then they're serving as barriers. Secondly, we are still looking at cultural stereotypes that plague decision-making. We do appreciate that as much as gender equality has been spoken about and to some large extent has been mainstreamed, we still have to grapple with the issue of cultural stereotypes that are retrogressive. So these are attitudes that plague our outlook in terms of issues such as succession law, where a good number of the population still does believe that women and girls are not supposed to inherit property. In terms of matrimonial property and marriage equality, that still needs to be addressed. To the issue of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence especially, so that we do not have law enforcement or duty bearers who still need to understand why a woman who's within a marriage needs to be protected from an abusive spouse, and that this is not something we should normalize. To, of course, professionally, we are seeing an increase of issues such as sexual harassment that we need to speak about openly and be able to address. So we need to work around the psychic of the cultural stereotypes. Yes, we are having a much younger population now occupying key decision-making positions, but then we are still seeing these prevalent negative stereotypes that need to be addressed. Thirdly, in terms of women and leadership, we still have a lot to do. Women who are seeking appointive or elective positions, as much as the Constitution has highlighted the need for a third representation or gender equality through Articles 27 and Articles 10 of our Constitution in terms of the principles and values that bind us as a country, we are still seeing that women, especially now that we are getting to an election season, have to contend with a lot of politically motivated violence, especially at primary level, to the day of the election, not only as candidates, but even as officials of institutions such as the IEBC, where we are seeing a trend of voters who intentionally identify and target female IEBC officials, for example, who are targeted during the election cycle. So we need to work a lot around enhancing the space for women in leadership, concretely as a country, addressing violence during elections, having the reforms that have been proposed as minimal electoral reforms being pushed through Parliament, both at the National Assembly and Senate. And a lot of these proposals in terms of minimal reforms have to do with issues such as campaign financing, which is also a hindrance to women in political participation. So a lot of it needs to be done, and more stringent action to propagators of gender-motivated political violence. Then we will have more women presenting themselves for elective seats, and cumulatively we will increase the number. Finally, the last barrier is a lack of political will. I know for a fact our judiciary and our legislature have done well. They have been able to push certain decisions either through jurisprudence or policies and recommendations that need implementation. Political will, however, is still lacking. I'll single out a single issue, or one of the most simplified, if I may say so, in terms of an issue, and that is affording or ensuring every girl in Kenya can access dignity packs at the most minimal of costs. This really is something that we are pushing for from our government, given that Kenya, one, is a country that has continuously engaged in mega billion infrastructural projects. And when we cost what it takes for the government to just afford every girl going to school with sanitary or dignity packs, it's just a fraction of that cost. What is lacking? Political will. That we have Treasury, especially singling out and earmarking funds that should go towards enhancing and ensuring that girls, especially in the very far-flung and marginalized areas of this country, do not miss out on school because they're not able to have dignity products. And secondly, the infrastructure, especially in our public schools, where we deliberately invest and make sure girls do have dignity in terms of washrooms, in terms of restrooms, so that then they do not have an excuse to miss out on school, because we know once a girl misses out on school, she becomes twice as vulnerable to issues such as early pregnancy. And we did see that reality with the COVID pandemic. And this in turn means this girl's schooling is interrupted and chances of her finalizing her school becomes a mirage. So we need to work around the barriers that continue to be around us. The law has created room for implementation. Policies and regulations do exist that guarantee women and girls equality. What then needs to happen is to move away from the laws and get busy to work, to implement, to appraise, to check the government's track record to realizing the girls' gains within the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that elaborate exposition of the challenges that you see from Frida and your experience, particularly highlighting the issues that you observed during the COVID pandemic. We have a question from one of our participants. It's directed to you, Anne, and it's related to your concern around their policies and legislations, but implementation, which is what we've observed also from the presentation by Dr. Mutangi about what is also happening in Zimbabwe, the gap between, the practical and what is in the books. So the question is from our National Police Women's Wives Associations, and it says that many women suffer in silence because they don't know their rights. How can you reach as many women to enlighten them on this? And a follow-up question also, and we have a hand up, and we hope to have a caller calling, asking the question, do these constitutional provided or guarantee rights in both our countries, perhaps also for Dr. Tarisai to think about, only enjoyed by women in the urban areas? What about the women in the rural areas? Just for you to quickly respond to that before we go to our last panelist, being Dr. Biegon, just responding to some of the questions. And our participants continue to engage us with your comments, question on our social media platform, on our YouTube channel. We're happy to pose the questions to our panelists. Over to you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elsie, and thank you to the audience members who have posed the questions. I will try to be quite brief in my response. I think in terms of the question from the National Police Wives Association, is that a lot more needs to be done, that we agree. The law has articulated what women's and girls' rights are, and the courts in a lot of instances have gone further to reinforce and to guarantee these decisions. I think for us in Kenya, our judiciary, especially in safeguarding women's rights, has done extremely well. Allow me to single out a few cases just within the public realm. On the issue of affirmative action, we had our Chief Justice Emeritus literally taking the bull by its horns and dissolving Parliament for failure to articulate Article 27 and 100 on representation. We've had progressive jurisprudence in terms of reproductive rights, such as the JMM case. Just last week, we had the landmark decision on female genital mutilation and cutting that really outlawed and reinforced the position that this practice is outdated and should not take place in our country. So that everyone in terms of guaranteeing women's rights has done their part. What we need to do, and I do really like what Dr. Tarisai articulated, we must find ways as women collectively and men who are part of the women's movement to take this gospel away from the courts, away from the parliament, away from the civil society roundtables to where it matters. Our schools are the front lines, our religious institutions are the front lines, where we need to be able to work with them to enhance the ability for them to speak about these issues in a way that is understood. When you talk about the rights and the realm of legislation, a lot of it is technical, a lot of it is legalist to ordinary Kenyans. So what we need is to break this down to a simplified version. FIDA has done that to some extent, alongside partners such as ICJ, and I really love this book that we are speaking about today. This is a milestone that we should be able to be used as a tool for any woman in Kenya to understand what does the law mean to me. When we say I have rights, what are my guaranteed rights? And then going beyond that to the places that we need to speak more about in terms of the front lines, in terms of schools, in terms of colleges, in terms of women group organizations who are all constantly meeting. I think the one thing we've seen with women in Kenya, call them for a roundtable banking meeting, they all show up. So can we then mainstream and make sure the first agenda beyond enhancing the quorum numbers and making sure everyone is present is just a snippet of what the law really provides. So it is doable, and we take on the challenge, working alongside all the partners present here today to see how best do we take this gospel in a manner that's understandable, that Kenyans and women can relate to easily, and then that is easier for them to understand and take to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. You mentioned that the judiciary has done a good job at promoting gender equality. Does the judiciary receive constant training on application of gender equality in its decisions?
Thank you, Santana. From FIDA's perspective, one, being a key member of the NCAJ, that's the National Council on Administration of Justice, as well as working with stakeholders such as the JTI, I can confirm that there is a willingness for them to receive training. What we realize, especially from a bar bench perspective, and I speak as a member of the bar, is that usually there's a careful balance where, yes, we want the judicial officers to be in court every day for matters to be dispensed with, but we must also deliberately create time for them to receive training. So that if a court is closed for 3 days, for a judge or a magistrate to receive good training, then the bar, on the other hand, does not indicate or start showing agitation because they feel matters are being delayed. So investment in career development, investment in training is something that must be done. We have seen, for instance, as FIDA, where we are currently working with the judiciary on a number of gender equality programs. The willingness is there. What we need to do as stakeholders within the sector is to support the judiciary in terms of their willingness and their openness to career development, so that once courts are closed, then we are able to accommodate that, for example, for them to receive training. And most of the time, it does not take long. We have participated as FIDA in judicial annual colloquiums, where they actually deliberately set aside time away from their very busy schedules, because remember, this is the one chance that all of them have to meet. They also have very many other agenda items, but we have seen in the recent past where they deliberately carve out time for career development, for gender equality, and FIDA has participated in enhancing the awareness on a number of issues such as labor rights, development in terms of reproductive rights, and it's something that we want to continue. Innovation is required around COVID, where we may not be able to meet entirely together, but then where the magistrates, for example, are meeting or the judges are meeting, stakeholders, not only FIDA, but others in the sector, do go out of their way proactively to approach the judiciary through the JTI or other institutions and indicate a willingness to just spare time and involve the judiciary in terms of day-to-day development. So we have seen that progress, and we are very excited, as Lady Justice said, that now we have an acting CJ who's a woman and who really understands where we are coming from, that during her tenure we can be able, even if brief, to be able to push for a lot of mainstreaming of gender equality training within the judiciary across the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. We're happy to learn that the judiciary does receive constant training on the application of gender equality, and that they actually have the appetite to learn more on the application of gender equality in their decisions. One last follow-up question. In your view, do you think that there's gender equality amongst the judicial officers themselves?
Thank you, Santana. From where we sit as FIDA, gender equality has two components. So there is the actual mainstreaming, where would talk of numbers, and I know Lady Judge spoke about this and alluded to this, but there's also the attitude to appreciate, whether you're a man or a lady within the judiciary, that gender does shape our life, gender does shape our decisions, and the cases that will be presented to you will also have gender components. So to the former issue in terms of numbers, we have seen deliberate efforts in the recent past to increase the number of women in the judiciary. The magistrate courts, for example, are doing extremely well. I don't have the actual statistics, but I know we are doing very well. The High Court is also well represented in terms of the women. But of course, as you get to the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, as Judge mentioned, then we have fewer and fewer numbers. And for us as FIDA, we have openly submitted to the Judicial Service Commission quite recently that there are 2 vacancies at the Supreme Court. There is a vacancy of the Chief Justice and the vacancy of a judge to the Supreme Court. Really, we are hoping and looking at the merit of the women who've applied, that we should be able to increase the number of women in Kenya's Supreme Court and hopefully bridge the 50-50 gap where possible. So it is doable because, one, we have extremely competent, skilled and experienced judicial officers who are women in this country, who have been tried and tested. Just 2 weeks ago, FIDA was launching a workshop where we were working with the correctional facilities, and we had one of the members of the judiciary, that's Honorable Martha Mutuku, who came and presided over, and you could see the passion she has, how she articulates the issues, because she's been dealing with them on a day-to-day basis. So I do confirm from FIDA's perspective that we have no shortage of skilled, equipped, and competent women to occupy the numbers. We need to see that being pushed through the decisions of the Judicial Service Commission in terms of recruitments and promotions. In terms of the second layer, Santana, the attitude is most important, because at the end of the day, a case will be presented to either a male or a female judicial officer. What we need is a constant appreciation. And from the decisions I cited, which are just a few, you can see deliberately the courts wanting to incline and to understand, what does gender equality mean? When you look at landmark decisions such as Dr. Tatu, the 160 girls case that really articulated police responsibility in terms of investigation, Article 244, to the SGBV case on post-election violence, you can see there's an appreciation by the judiciary, one, to really understand what female victims go through when they are victims of sexual and gender-based violence within a political election violence setting. What does that require? So we can see that there has been a lot of gain, but we need to go beyond the cases that are just presented that have a female face, that have female victims, to the day-to-day deliberations, whether it's around evictions, whether it's about housing and land rights, whether it's on criminal matters, to taxation, because often we never associate taxation that it has a gender component. These are issues that have gender lenses and gender layers on it. So if we can have more decisions being pushed in terms of progressive jurisprudence, that at the arrival of the decision, there is deliberate reasoning by the courts in its language, in its approach, to appreciate that issues within society affect men and women differently. And that's the bedrock of what gender equality is. So that by the time you decide that traders at market X need to be evicted, you have considered their male and female traders whose issues are unique, and at the end of the day will not be affected by a singular issue the same. So a lot more needs to be done, and we are here as institutions working on gender equality to support the judiciary in terms of gender mainstreaming and gender equality, so that eventually we are having progressive jurisprudence that we can rely upon, not only as legal fraternity members, but as a society that really dwells into the dynamics of gender equality, why decisions affect men and women differently, and how we cater for that diversity. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And well-articulated perspectives around, your work with the judiciary and the progress that we are making. Allow me now to invite Dr. Biegon to, just speaking up from FIDA Kenya perspective and Kenyan experience, as well as from Zimbabwe, and hearing the personal experience of Judge in serving on the bench, and based on your expertise as, the expert in African human rights mechanisms, what do you think is the role of these mechanisms in advancing women and girls' rights in the continent? So first question for you, Dr. Biegon, and also speaking to what Dr. Tarisai Mutangi and Anne have said, civil society strategies, how can they then use the regional mechanisms to continue closing the gap between theory and practice in advancing the rights of women and girls? Welcome, Dr. Biegon.
Thank you, Elsie, and thank you, ICJ Kenya and CAS, for inviting me to this timely and apt discussion during this month. On to your first question, and really, as you say, it's building on the points that have already been made by the panelists that have gone before me. What is the role of the African human rights system in the promotion of gender equality across the continent? Maybe I should start by first mentioning that when we speak about the African regional human rights system, we speak about the normative and institutional frameworks that have been established under the auspices of the African Union to promote and protect human rights across the continent. And in this regard, we are speaking about three important institutions that are charged with monitoring the situation of human rights on the continent. The first and the oldest, of course, is the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, based in Banjul and established under the African Charter, which also has the responsibility of supervising states' implementation of the Protocol on the Rights of Women in Africa, popularly known as the Maputo Protocol. Then we have the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which, as has already been said here, retired Justice, Lady Justice Joyce Alwoch was amongst the inaugural members of that committee and was responsible for establishing it. And the Children's Committee is responsible and focuses primarily on the rights of children, including girls. Then finally, the African Court on Human and People's Rights, based in Arusha, Tanzania, is the judicial arm that is responsible for providing judicial decisions, judgments, and orders on human rights on the continent. What is the role of these three institutions? I think first and foremost, these three institutions play a key role in monitoring the extent to which states are promoting gender equality, or more generally, the rights of women and girls across the continent. And in this regard, the African Commission and the African Children's Committee uses, for instance, the state reporting mechanism, under which they use this to hold states accountable, and states are required to report on the extent to which they have implemented, for instance, the Maputo Protocol. And in this regard, I think it's important to mention here two important points. That since the adoption of the Maputo Protocol in 2003, and it's coming into force in 2005, we have now 42 state parties across the continent that have ratified the Maputo Protocol. This means that 13 countries or 13 member states of the African Union are yet to ratify the protocol. And amongst the 42 that have ratified the Maputo Protocol, only 15 have submitted their initial report to the African Commission for review. So we see that there is actually arrears and delays and lack of commitment by state parties in submitting their reports that can be used for a discussion and a review of the extent to which they are implementing gender rights and gender equality. And here, because the book that you are dealing with here focuses primarily on Kenya, it's good to know, though very late, Kenya ratified the Maputo Protocol in 2010. It's only 10 years later, actually, last month, that Kenya now finally submitted its initial report under the Maputo Protocol. And it's coming up for review, most probably during the 67th Ordinary Session of the African Commission that is set to begin on 13th of April. Then here I must also mention before I proceed, Elsie, that one of the issues that civil society in terms of strategies that we need to be working on the immediate point is that Kenya has entered reservations on the Maputo Protocol. And these reservations particularly focus on reducing military expenditure in favor of social development and promotion of gender equality. Kenya has entered a reservation on that clause of the Maputo Protocol. And secondly, it has also entered a reservation on the question of abortion for medical grounds. So that will be one of the advocacy strategies that I think civil society in the country, and during the review of the report, that should be the focus going forward. Another role that the regional mechanisms could play is also beyond the state reporting procedure, is the normative standard setting that so far they have played quite well in terms of setting the standards and giving flesh and life to the Maputo Protocol. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights have developed general comments, for instance, on division of matrimonial property in the event of divorce. So it has a general comment on this issue, but it has also a long list of resolutions ranging from sexual and gender-based violence targeting women to other issues concerning women's rights and gender equality more broadly. Similarly, the African Committee on the Experts and Rights of the Child have also developed normative guidelines, resolutions, and general comments that focuses primarily on the rights of girls. Then thirdly, these institutions have rolled out continental-wide promotion of women's rights. And here I just want to focus on two campaigns at the African Union level that have been rolled out by the regional systems. The first is the African Union campaign on ending child marriage. This is a campaign that is led by the African Committee on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and there is actually indeed a special rapporteur on ending of child marriage, but it has roped in the entire system of the African Union, including the political organs and state parties, is encouraging for an end to child marriage on the continent. Then secondly, there is the Decriminalization of Abortion campaign that was launched in 2016 by the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Women in Africa. This campaign is ongoing, and several civil society organizations are involved in that regard. But there is need for more and more civil society organizations across the continent to also join hands and bolster these particular campaigns. There are many other activities and strategies that these regional mechanisms have put in place for the implementation of gender equality. But I thought that for this moment, I could mention those three, Elsie. Elsie, I can't hear you, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Now, yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that illuminating presentation around, the normative content as well as the institutions within the African Union human rights mechanisms that are striving to promote women and girls' rights through just not only normative setting standards, but also fleshing out through general comments and the resolutions that you've highlighted, as well as highlighting the two important campaigns that pretty much touch on Kenya's reservation of the Maputo Protocol and employing civil society and members of the public to use those as opportunities to leverage on advocacy strategies. A follow-up question for you, which is also part of the discussions in the book that Idzo raised in terms of facets of women's lives. There's the women and media. Is there concerted efforts within the African human rights mechanisms to also focus on women in the media, an emerging area that has potentially a lot of violations, not just for women, but also for adolescent girls, particularly looking at the online campaigns and online technology-assisted violence against women in the continent. And then finally, for you, Dr. Biegon, what would be the interlinkages that you see for the national level within the African human rights mechanisms that could also enhance and advance, particularly with such innovative approaches that we see in developing texts and compendia around laws and policies that could advance women and girls' rights? compounded question for you, Dr. Biegon, but I know you can quickly summarize and give us feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsie. So on the first issue on women and the media and what the African human rights system institutions have done so far, I think the starting point will be the work of the African Commission Special Rapporteur on the rights of human rights defenders in Africa. And over the years, beginning in 2004 with the establishment of this special mechanism, we have seen the special rapporteur focusing on the rights of journalists as being as they are human rights defenders by virtue of the work and context in which they work on a day-to-day basis. And we have seen the special rapporteur intervening in specific cases of women journalists and asking especially those that are under threat or imminent danger. The special rapporteur has used the tool of urgent appeals and urgent letters to government, asking government to protect women journalists that are facing specific danger or specific harm. So that is one way that the special mechanisms have used, to relate specifically to questions of women and media. In a more broader context, not necessarily focusing on women, but we have seen the African Court on Human and People's Rights making very important landmark judgments that seek to protect media freedom, and in particular, its decision on criminalization, on what we term as criminal defamation. So the African Court has issued a judgment saying that criminal defamation is unlawful and is incompatible with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So while this judgment did not deal specifically on gender, but it does, the protection that it offers covers also women journalists and women media practitioners. And on this point, just allow me, Elsie, to also mention that the African Court, the African Commission, and the Children's Committee, all in recent years have also issued specific decisions and judgments that focus on gender equality. So we know, for instance, of the African Court decision concerning Mali, where it said that the Malian Family Code that provides for minimum age of marriage for girls at 16 and with consent at 15 was incompatible and in violation of the African Charter. We know, for instance, the African Commission in 2013 issued a decision concerning Egypt, where it ruled that women journalists, actually, a woman journalist who was sexually harassed and violated during a demonstration in 2005, the Egyptian government had failed to provide protection to this woman journalist. And therefore it was responsible for providing not only protection, but compensation to this woman journalist. We know also the African Children's Committee, there is a pending case or communication before the Children's Committee regarding the expulsion of pregnant women in Tanzania. And a similar case is also pending before the African Court on Human and People's Rights. So that is actually, just in addition to my initial point, one way in which these regional bodies are dealing with gender equality and promotion of women's and girls' rights. On strategies and the linkages between the domestic level and the regional level, I think I've mentioned one way through which civil society, for instance, can participate in filing alternative or shadow reports in the context, for instance, in Kenya, in relation to their submission of the state party report under the Maputo Protocol. But also they are bringing these continental campaigns to the domestic level, bringing them back home. So while the campaigns have been developed at the regional level and is spearheaded by African Union bodies, there needs to be domestic constituencies, state actors, non-state actors, and in this regard, civil society that can bring this campaign to the domestic level, to villages and to hamlets across the continent, so that, as my previous co-panelists have said, they're not only aware of these campaigns, but can also participate in fostering the ideals and values that these campaigns seek to advance. I think I'll stop there, Elsie, for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Biagon, for those highlighting that across the continent, emerging gender equality jurisprudence that create the linkages, and also re-emphasizing the interventions that we can take advantage of, riding on the campaigns in the continent, but also specifically addressing some of the thematic issues through the special mechanisms when issues are, say, for women and media that you have highlighted. So thank you very much, our panelists, for that. We have a couple of questions, but allow me to invite Santana and a few comments that I will read after, and then just for Santana to just take over these sessions and invite the panelists to give their parting shots.
Thank you very much, panelists. We've had a very enriching discussion today, discussing the contents of the book, Women and Girls Know Your Rights. But not only that, we've discussed the gains and drawbacks of implementing the various legislations in Kenya. And we've also looked at another jurisdiction, Zimbabwe, and we've looked at Africa as a whole. I'd like to invite the panelists to give their concluding remarks, and I'll begin with retired Justice Joyce Alwatch.
Judge, we can't hear you. Yeah.
I beg your pardon. I was still muted. Can you hear me?
Judge.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I want to congratulate Isa to begin with for this book. Isa, I've just, I read your book this morning, and I think you did a good job. Thank you, well done. I also want to draw it to the attention of the panelists that there is, or rather the organizers and panelists, that there is the Judiciary Gender Audit Report 2019, the Judiciary of Kenya, the Judiciary Gender Audit Report 2019. The report was prepared by, it was the National Gender and Equality Commission and the International Association of Women Judges Kenya chapter. They commissioned two experts who produced this report, and I think it's very important that you try and get hold of this report. It's online, and the report was actually signed by the chairperson of National Gender and Equality Commission, Dr. Joyce Mutindo, and the retired Chief Justice Maraga. The report is online. It highlights key issues of concern. They identified key issues of concern in the judiciary, and there are key issues 1 to 9 in as far as gender equality is concerned. That's why I'm drawing it to your attention so that you can look at it. And then there are 6, they listed 6 actions that need to be taken so as to sort out these issues that they pointed out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I just got to know about it yesterday. I read it, and I think it's a very good one to read so that you know that the judiciary is not being left behind. They have an audit report, Judiciary Gender Audit Report 2019. Because I was speaking mostly from the point of view of the judiciary, I thought this was a very important audit report that you get to read about, and you read about the issues that have been identified as issues of concern within the judicial system. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I think I have enjoyed the discussions very much, especially the discussions from the African Union, because I was there like many, many years ago when I was chairing the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge. You brought to our attention a very important text. After this webinar, that will be the first thing that we look up, the Judiciary Gender Audit Report. Now we'll move to our next panelist, Dr. Tarisai. Please give us your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Santana. I enjoyed, the presentations that were made by my colleagues, and I would like to make 2 points. The first one is really an observation. When I was listening to Anne, her presentation was basically like Zimbabwe. You could remove Kenya and put Zimbabwe there. So I do not even have to respond to the questions also posed, because she comprehensively dealt with those questions. But then it got me thinking that if the problem of gender equality, women's rights, and so forth, it's so universal. It's well articulated across regions, whether it's East Africa or here in Southern Africa. But why is it that we haven't gotten to also universalize our solutions and synergize them from one region to another? Probably, those initiatives are already there, they're already happening. But I'm just thinking that can't we rethink the approach to say our problems are well articulated, it's well defined, sort of universal, and there are also universal players who are playing in this field of trying to do with gender equality. How can we create more linkages and universalize our approach so that we deal with the problem once and for all? Of course, I'm being ambitious by saying once and for all. I heard from Stephanie to say even in Germany, they're not yet there. So how can we regionalize this at a national level? At a national level, how can we create these synergies and ensure that this problem we all know from everywhere very well, come up with specific solutions to it, of course, progressively over time. And secondly, I think my colleague, Dr. Abigon, for articulating the role that the African Union or regional system and bodies are doing as far as gender equality, women's rights are concerned. And I also like this point to say, let's domesticate these campaigns. Let's domesticate this initiative. Why? Because if we take cases before these bodies alleging violations of rights at the national level, and we get good judgments or decisions from those bodies, the solution is not at that level. They will come back again back to the national level to say, how can we get these decisions implemented? So it's one way for CSOs to take cases to these bodies, but they have to wait for even a bigger fight when the decisions have come up in their favor to say, can we get governments to implement these decisions? So we are back to the territory where it all matters, with the national level. So I adopt entirely his proposition to say, let's domesticate these campaigns, let's take cases to these bodies, but bring the decisions back home, not just to publicize them in the media and show that we have won before these bodies, but fold our sleeves again to ensure that we monitor implementation of this decision and we report on what our governments are doing in terms of implementing those same standards. So the 2 points that I'll leave with this. Thank
you. Thank you, Dr. Tarisai. Indeed, we need to universalize our approach in dealing with gender equality. And also, we have a bigger challenge. We may take these issues to the Africa Court, but how do we get our governments to implement the decisions of these bodies? That is a homework for all of us. As civil society, we need to see how we can lobby to get our governments to implement these decisions. Now we'll move to Annie Riri. Please give us your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Santana, and thank you to my co-panelists for this very enlightening session. I have definitely learned a lot. Allow me to also appreciate Itza for the great work she put in towards preparing this book. I think it's really, really commendable and great to see that the younger feminists are coming up with a lot of fire in their belly. So well done to you, Itza. Thank you, Judge, for pointing us to the Judiciary Gender Report. I can confirm FIDA has looked at the report, and indeed it is a very, very important report that we all need to see how best to support the judiciary in terms of implementing the recommendations. As a way of parting short, as a woman who's celebrating International Women's Month, I think I want to really borrow the cue from Choose to Challenge. And what am I challenging? I think for me, two things stand out in terms of our Kenyan context. One, we need to be committed and to challenge the adherence to the rule of law. In terms of jurisprudence, we have done very well. As I've stated, if you itemize the cases that the courts have decided in favor of women, there's no shortage of those cases. So the rule of law has been articulated. Where the challenge now remains, and that's what my co-panelists have alluded to in their parting shot, is bridging the divide between the gains for women in paper, in orders, in decisions, to the quality of life they need to live. And that's where the work really needs to be. It will call for a lot of us really folding our sleeves, constantly taking the government to task, stepping outside our comfort zone, camping outside parliaments and state houses, boycotting economic decisions if need be. I think we really now need to take this to the next level, in the sense that decisions are there. What women in Kenya are waiting for is to benefit and to enjoy this. So I think as a sector, as we have stated, implementation is what is lacking. Let's be ready to implement, and implementation is where the work is. It is never an enjoyable task, in the sense that you have to step out of your comfort zone, but the women, not only of Kenya, but of the globe, need us to do that. And Kenya and FIDA Kenya is ready to be counted among those who are willing to be uncomfortable, to push compliance in terms of rule of law, so that the gains of women under the Constitution of Kenya, which is not self-implementing, but has been given a boost in the arm by the judiciary in terms of progressive jurisprudence, is actually brought to life. And so our call to action is to invite like-minded minds to join us in this cause, and together let us push for full implementation of this constitution, of the decisions made, starting with the hallmark decision that, for starters, in Kenya, the National Assembly and Senate should really be home by now. They were dissolved and constitutionally are sitting in office. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Yes, we need to fold our sleeves and be it go to the streets or boycott products or whatever, so that the rule of law may be followed. We'll now move to Dr. Japeth. Please give us your concluding remarks.
Thank you, Santana. I think if there is one clear thing that has emerged from this discussion today, especially beginning with retired Justice Joyce Aluoch, is that over the years, there's been significant, though slow, progress in the strides that have been taken in the promotion of gender equality in Kenya and across the continent. But despite that progress, there is still much that still needs to be done going forward. The challenges that women face and girls face across the continent, the impediments to the full realization of gender equality still remain a lot that civil society and the actors and other relevant actors still need to continue adopting a long-term strategies to ensure that these challenges are dealt with and that even more gains are added to what has already been achieved. And then finally, I thought I should also use this chance to mention one particular development that has almost gone unnoticed in many countries. And this is the process that is currently being led by South Africa in developing an African Union Convention on Prevention of Violence Against Women. South Africa has been leading the drafting of this process, and so far civil society participation outside of South Africa has been very, very minimal. So it's one process that I think civil society in Kenya and beyond the boundaries of South Africa should consider engaging a lot. And here, just as a final remarks, it's good to remember that civil society really played a critical role in ensuring that the Maputo Protocol was one of the fastest treaties of the African Union to come into force. It was adopted in 2003, and in 2005, less than 2 years later, it had come into force. And this is particularly because of a continent-wide campaign that civil society launched on the ratification of the Maputo Protocol. And in this regard, on what Tarisai was saying, there is a need for cross-border coalitions and movements of civil society across the continent on gender equality and women's rights. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to be part of this panel and to be part of this discussion today.
Thank you, Japheth. You've brought something very important to our attention about the Convention of Violence Against Women currently being developed in South Africa. I think we as civil society should engage in that process. And also you made a very important recommendation that we should come up with more strategies to further advance the gains that have already been made in promoting gender equality. I'll now hand over back to Elsie.
Yes. Thank you very much, Santana, and thank you very much, our panelists, as we move into the closing session of our roundtable discussion today. Allow me, please, to invite us, Dr. Stephanie, just to give her closing remarks on behalf of the Conrad Adenauer Foundation, the co-host of this roundtable webinar this morning. Dr. Stephanie, please.
Thank you, Elsie, and thank you to all our high-ranking and passionate panelists. And I must say, I'm really touched of this lively discussion. And so we pointed out in this discussion a lot of problems, but at least from what you said, I mean, there is also hope. Yeah, when I, for example, look at the journey of Lady Justice Aluoch, which was difficult for a woman in the beginning, but the situation has improved. Although, as I said before, we are not there yet globally. We are not there yet, and also the latest High Court decisions in Kenya that Anne Ireri mentioned on FGM and SGBV and post-election violence. I think these decisions are really a milestone and give great hope for an improvement of the situation. And what I take from this discussion is a lot of inspiration and encouragement also for our work as Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And I thank you for giving such positive comments on our book. That really means a lot to me, and that encourages me to go on with our work in this direction. And Dr. Tarisai, he mentioned, or he had this very important notion that gender equality should, it should be taught to school children. Yeah, and this is actually so. If we can make a contribution as CAS to go in this direction to strengthen citizens, civil society, then I think we have already reached an aim and made some kind of sensible contribution. And for me, maybe to point out as a last point, it's always important to have women and men on board, and girls and boys, because and I'm very, very happy that we have a mixed panel here, because I think by gender discrimination, societies deprive themselves of a great part of their potential. So gender discrimination does not only have a negative effect on women, but on men likewise. So we need a lot more emancipated men who are aware of this fact. I thank you a lot for all your contributions. I'm really happy I could be a co-host of this excellent roundtable, and I wish you all the best for your future work. I'm sure we will be in touch in the future. Thank you, Elsie.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie. Thank you, panelists, once again, and thank you, Conrad, for agreeing and accepting our proposition to host this roundtable, just to discuss the content of the book with our ICJ Kenya members and FIDA members, just to highlight some of the gains as part of our celebration of International Women's Month. So allow me, panelists, to come to a close by saying that on behalf of the ICJ Kenya Secretariat team here, our council, I really want to sincerely thank you all, our distinguished jurists and panelists. Thank you, Lady Justice Joyce Aluoch. Thank you, Dr. Stephanie of Conrad. Thank you, Itza, the young feminist author of the publication. Thank you, Dr. Tarisai Mutangi, for reconnecting with ICJ and for giving us perspectives of Zimbabwe. Thank you, Anne, our sister organization of the FIDA Kenya. Enjoyed the conversations and understanding the practical work that you have put towards advancing gender equality in Kenya, as well as Dr. Japheth Biegon, who is also an ICJ member and a great resource on the African human rights mechanisms. Finally, allow me to please extend our gratitude to all the participants who joined us online today from FIDA Kenya and ICJ Kenya, and the members of the public who were able to join us in this webinar. Thank you so much for your time, for your questions. We continue our engagement with those questions we've not been able to respond to. We will be able to come back to you either on email or on our social media platforms. Finally, we couldn't have done this without the production team here at the ICJ Kenya House, who've put all this together. Thank you, team, for all your hard work and dedication. Until next time, asanteni sana, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye from ICJ Kenya House. Enjoy your afternoon.